But guys, when you look at what the U.S. have in front of them today and the task at hand, Tony, what kind of approach do you think they should be taking into this final game, knowing that a win gets them through?
Well, you're playing a team in Guinea that hasn't won in 6 matches, right? They haven't kept a clean sheet. So I would think the pictures that we saw in the last match against New Zealand of pressing and getting forward quickly, hard into tackles, not sitting back like we saw in match day 1 against France. I think that's sort of the picture, Ali, that we're going to see. And at least that's what I hope we're going to see. I don't think this team is set up to sit back and endure some pressure. And plus, with a team that hasn't won in this long, you really don't want to give them a chance to breathe. You just want to suffocate them as much as you can. So I would be really surprised, Nico, if we saw anything other than these guys just getting after Guinea from minute number 1. That would shock me.
They got to win. They got to win. Frankly, I don't know if I care too much about how it's done. No, and that's not true. I do care. I think it's important how they get it done. But as long as you get over the hump and get into the knockout stage, and we see that forward progression, it's difficult to impose. What I'm trying to get at, that it's difficult to impose to just say, oh, they got to go and they got to play top football, from one moment to the next. Where, against France, it was hopeful. It wasn't the best, but it was hopeful. It was good. And then New Zealand didn't really offer much. So it's just keep on taking forward steps. At this point, I don't care how big the stride is, but get the job done against a team that you should get the job done against, because come knockout stage, if the U.S. is in the knockout stage, the opposition will be a little bit more elite. It'll get harder and harder as the rounds progress.
I agree. I don't want to say that I don't want what I'm about to say be taken as, use this as in any way, shape, or form as like a training session. I think, Guinea is also playing for their lives. They also want to win. Mm-hmm. They want to walk out of here with pride. So I don't think it's going to be an easy match by any stretch of the imagination. But the level of the competition that we're about to play behooves us to play the same way we did against New Zealand. I don't want to see us sitting back, like Tony said, like the way we played against France. And frankly, I think we've all mentioned it, but the first 60 minutes against France, I felt we played well, but I certainly don't think we played expansive or progressive. We saw that in New Zealand. I want to see the same thing. I want to see, fullbacks getting forward. I want to see us overloading their final third. I want to get to the point where we're attacking way more than we're defending. And I think that's what we're going to see today.
Tony, when you do face lesser opponent or a team that you are fully expected to go out and beat, how much more difficult is that from a mental standpoint in the game?
Well, there's obviously the scare of taking your foot off the pedal a little bit, but this is a team that understands if they win, they go through, right? So I said yesterday, kind of jokingly, right, this is the knockout rounds for the U.S., right? You win and you go through. That's kind of what you're going to see the rest of the tournament. They're still young players, right, in this group. So I don't know that they have the mode of, hey, we don't go 100% all the time in whatever we're doing. And I would be really surprised if we don't see in that first minute where they are pressing all over the field, which then gives you energy, which then sets a tone for your team, and then gives you an idea of how teams are going to approach the rest of the match. So it's important, but I would imagine that this conversation's already been had in the dressing room, and there won't be an issue of, hey, we can take this team lightly, because if you still look, I'm looking at Naby Keita, who we all know, right, Leipzig first, Liverpool, and now Werder Bremen, but him and John Tolkien today, like on that side of the field, I'm like, I don't want to see what John Tolkien does against an experienced veteran like Naby Keita and how this all. So there are a couple of matchups that you can be concerned about, but you can't take your foot off the pedal.
Let's take a look at the projected 11 and those tone setters who are going to be tasked with potentially coming out and getting the job started for the United States today. Alexis, when you take a look at this group, what player or players are you keying in on today?
I mean, for me, I see Griffin Yao there. I was hoping that Kevin Paredes would start in that position, but also Griffin Yao has proven when he gets minutes that he can be really good, especially on the attacking end. Very incisive, really good in sort of that half space on the right-hand side, picking out either somebody at the top of the box or getting a through ball in the box for someone making a run. For me, Griffin Yao, that right-hand side I think is going to be important, because I think the left-hand side might be a little bit busy,
Yeah, and Nico, we saw Gianluca Busio deal with an injury at the end of that New Zealand game the other day. When you look at the midfield, what intrigues you about this group and how these three work together?
McGlynn is the replacement per Marko Mitrovic for Busio, and I think that's understandable. And then it's the question, we were asking questions about Mihailovic, right? I mean, he did score the penalty kick goal. He hit the crossbar. That was against France.
Yeah, France.
That was a good shot. He was threatening. And it seems like Mitrovic isn't a man that likes to change much. I'm more surprised about Yao being in there as opposed to Kevin Paredes. But there are arguments to start Yao. There's not too much you could finagle with because the squad is so thin. A couple of changes here. Tessman is a lock in the midfield. I think he offers a very important sense of balance to this team. It's either Booth or Kremashi coming in the second half. I don't know if Kremashi is ready to start on a team like this. But I'm curious what you think about that attacking midfield, that creative role that the U.S. has in midfield.
Yeah, I said that I thought maybe Mihailovic takes a seat from the start today, right? It's 3 games in 7 days. I know everyone's legs are tired, but remember what we saw when he started to make changes. He put Paxton Aronson as basically a false 9 for a little bit before he brought some other players on. So I wonder if you do have Paredes on one side, Yao on the other side, and mix it up like that with Aronson up top, or there's got to be some mix because down the road here, all these guys aren't going to be able to play every single minute of every game. The depth is going to be tested here a little bit, but I would expect 3 or 4 changes, of course, with the one that Nico talked about with McGlynn. Even if Busio is healthy today, even if he made it through, it was a hamstring, it looked like. We haven't gotten any reports, but when you're grabbing your hamstring like that,
it's not worth it.
Yeah. It's not worth it today if you plan on moving forward.
Yeah, and in fact, I'd be interested in what you think regarding Mihailovic. I understand the idea of maybe sitting him and giving him a rest, but there's also, for me, it feels like he's starting to grow into the tournament. The player I think that we saw in France, he had, the shot across the crossbar, but for me, I don't think he really offered too much in the form of the attack. I felt like he was sitting back. I'm not sure if that came from Mitrovic or if that was maybe he just wasn't finding the game, but I think we saw a lot more of that in New Zealand. It feels to me like, the pattern is showing that maybe he'll do even more in this match. So maybe sitting him would sort of be taking that momentum away potentially.
I think it's difficult to gauge that New Zealand game. New Zealand, honestly, they were so poor. The level that New Zealand offered was so low that it's difficult to gauge if the United States played well or not. I'll take the win without a doubt.
Well, they played well.
They played well, yeah. and they took care of business, right? I'd be interested to see where Marko Mitrovic thinks this team is progressing, how much he thinks Mihailovic is progressing. Is he the best person to slot under a Duncan Maguire who seems to not be getting activated as you would like your 9 to be
not at all
active, right? So
he's a workhorse, but he's
right.
not doing anything in front of goal. And I get that that's because he's not getting the service either. But at the end of the day, you're the only 9 on this roster.
Right.
I need to see you find that goal maybe from a corner or a dead ball. Do something.
Well, that leads us to, speaking of progression, players that we'd like to see or think we need to see taking a big step forward in this game. So, Nico, I'll come to you first. Who do you think needs to have a big game today for the United States?
For me, I'm using more of the France game as a reference to say this is ideally how we want to be playing against big teams, and I thought Paxton Aronson was pretty dangerous against France. Isn't it funny how genetics work? He looks, when he runs, it's a carbon copy of his brother, the way that they run.
Yeah. They have the same gait.
The same body language. Yeah. It's impressive. That being said, I think he offered a lot to the U.S. in wide positions, also when he tucked in. So I expect him to be a difference maker. Obviously, everyone needs to have a good game. It's not like, one guy's... I don't think there's any single guy on this team that it's like, all right, time to put the team on my shoulder. I'll take care of business. But if there's anybody that I feel could shine, it's Paxton Aronson.
And every player right now, right, is fighting to earn a spot at some point on the senior team, which is, if I'm not mistaken, still looking for a head coach. So you don't know tactically what
You're
that
not
person's...
mistaken. Sorry, continue.
Ha ha ha. Anyway, Tony, you're up next. Who do you think needs to have a big game?
Jack McGlynn for me, and I'll go to the second game against New Zealand because that's when Busio got hurt. And by virtue of what Marko Mitrovic basically told us with the lineups, that Busio and Tessman were his 2 guys. right? So Busio now goes out, and McGlynn came in and I thought was really good in that game. He offers a different dimension. He's a guy with long-range passing. He can shoot from distance. He's not the same player as Busio is, but he's equally as effective for me as Busio is in what he does. So I think today is an important day for him because, Alexis, the fact that we don't know where Busio is, if we move forward, this is probably your guy moving forward in the midfield.
Yeah, we're going to depend on him. And, dude, his left foot, man, he could pick out a pass. Like, much better than I think Busio. I think Busio is maybe a little bit better at driving into spaces and sort of putting a little bit more pressure on the back line. But Jack McGlynn, once he starts looking up, I know something good's about to come. So really excited about him.
Okay, and your player to watch?
I went with Kevin Paredes because I'm assuming he's going to start. I know.
Hey, that was just our projected 11.
Yeah,
everybody.
that was just our projected. But for me, Kevin Paredes, I would love to see him play on the left where he plays for his club team and where we've seen him in the past with the national team. But I feel like he's been able to be effective from the right. He's able to get it on the left. He's able to cut into spaces. Maybe get on the wing on the left a little more, get a little bit further closer to the touchline, and maybe put a little bit more pressure on that fullback on the left-hand side. I would love to see that, but for me, he's just one of those players that when you pass the ball to him, he's going to drive, he's going to create more space, he's going to get the ball moving into that final space and allows our players to get in the perfect spots offensively. I just love what he does. And he's really grown into one heck of a player so far. I can't wait to see how much further his development goes.
The talk about the wing play kind of leads me to my player to watch, which is Duncan McGuire, who we've talked a lot about, wanting to see him get more involved in the box, getting on the end of crosses, and finding where he fits in best to put himself in the most dangerous positions to put the ball in the back of the net for the United States. A lot of the talk about some of the central players this week in the Olympics with Mihailovic and with McGuire is that they've been dropping deep to help get on the ball, but it's going to be the next step, I think, for this team to be more goal dangerous in the box with players like Duncan McGuire and players like Georgi Mihailovic.
When this roster was released, on that note, with Charlie, we were asking, where's the pace, right? And I don't think necessarily pace, if I'm trying to analyze where Mitrovic's head was at when he was picking this team, pace doesn't necessarily mean who can hit sixth gear and run the fastest. Through Paredes, through Aronson, I think they have a start-stop, a change in rhythm that can offer you pause and shifts that you don't necessarily need from just all out, stallions getting to the end line and hitting across in. So I think at the end of the day, that's the key. If you're playing a 4-3-3 and you have a striker up top, you want to get him service, and I don't think we've found the right way to get Duncan McGuire on good crosses, on tap-ins, getting in behind and slotting that ball in so he can finish. I'd like to see more. That's, I think, the next facet of this U.S.'s team.
For me, I think a lot of that will come if we can find a way to get a bit more central in our attack as opposed to just focusing so much on the wings. And I know that's the style, and I know that's what Mitrovic is going for, is to be wing heavy. But especially on the top senior team, I think we're so dynamic going centrally. I'd love to see that be mimicked a little bit more. I think if he had someone that was just sitting at the top of the box, playing more of a 10 role, I think we'd see Duncan McGuire be a little bit more effective.
Tony, how confident are you that this group of players can find that balance attacking from the wings and centrally as well in this competition?
You're right. They got to get McGuire more involved, right? And they have been wide, and maybe that's been by design. Maybe that's been where they thought that they could get at these two teams. So we might see something that looks a little bit different, but I think it's important. You kind of touched on it. We need to get him a goal. Like he's a center forward. He needs to feel like he's involved. And center forwards, for all the work that they do defensively, there's only one way where they really feel like they're involved, right? It's they score goals. So I don't care. Hits off his shin, right? It doesn't matter today. The ball's got to find the back of the net for him.
Busio toe poked one in, for goodness sake. So it's just got to find the back of the net. And Duncan McGuire, that would certainly give him a lot of confidence moving forward in this competition.